In my view, we are at an extremely difficult time in the history of Northern Ireland. In my view, this is the most difficult phase that we've been in since the establishment of the power-sharing executive. Relations between Unionists and Republicans are the worst that I've seen in my 11 years as an elected representative. They're ill-tempered, they're acrimonious, they're disrespectful, and that causes problems. It exacerbates the situation that we find ourselves in. Pre-Brexit, our society was relatively peaceful, stable, and while not perfect, it was moving in the right direction. It was a status quo that most people felt they could live with. Successive polls showed that the percentage of the population who were fully committed to a united Ireland was fairly stable at around 22%. Those who self-identified as Northern Irish, that percentage was slowly increasing. They may have identified as Northern Irish and British, or Northern Irish and Irish, or Northern Irish, but that percentage was increasing. The exception, I suppose, was among loyalists who were discontent, remain discontent, that is working class unionists who felt that they have lost out when it's come to the peace dividend. The vote to leave the EU created, if not a state of chaos, certainly a state of uncertainty, anxiety, anger. Some people felt betrayed. And the constitutional question, which had sat very quietly and comfortably, like a grandmother in the corner of a room, was suddenly catapulted to centre stage. And while numerically it was the English working class and rural classes that really voted to bring us out of the European Union, unionists also received their fair share of blame. Well, fair share, they received a share of blame. We can debate whether it was a fair share or not. But in truth, unionists were and are pretty divided over Brexit. And some within the DUP are very unhappy that the party campaigned for Brexit. The PUP has historically been a pro-European party. I voted to remain, but I know a lot of working class unionists voted to leave. So the consequence, as we know, has been really the tribal divisions in Northern Ireland have been accentuated. We could add in RHI, and we could implicate the controversy around the Irish Language Act. We could point to the sectarianism that invariably leads up to elections, and we have had 3 elections in a very short period of time, feeding into that sectarian rhetoric. But the bottom line is that today our tribal divisions between nationalist, Republican and unionist and loyalist are worse than they've been for a couple of decades. So that is the situation that we find ourselves in. Why have we got here? Well, there are, I think, a number of reasons, but let me just focus on one. The debate around Brexit was riddled with exaggeration and misinformation. People were not informed. They were not encouraged to rationally evaluate the alternatives, the arguments. People voted on the basis of their emotions and often reacted emotionally to the information or disinformation that was put out there. But it wasn't just that. The EU institutions, by many, are viewed as remote, bureaucratic, irrelevant, and that coupled with the perception of outrageous wages paid to people in Brussels, coupled with a lack of accountability, has led to widespread disaffection toward the EU among many people, and not just working class people in Northern Ireland. But among the working class, they have not seen their lives improving, even though more often than not that was due to a failure of local or regional or national politics rather than due to the EU. But the fact of the matter is that for many people, they have felt life has been tough. The austerity measures have disproportionately affected the poor. People have struggled to make ends meet. They have been disaffected with politics. And so when it came to the Brexit vote, that disaffection and anger and frustration resulted, I think, in many people voting against, in my view, the evidence and voting in favour of Brexit. It's not unlike the phenomenon that resulted in Trump being elected, or President Trump being elected in the presidential elections in North America. But it does pose serious questions to those of us who consider our politics to be progressive. People feel that representative democracy has not served them well. It hasn't represented them. They felt that they've had little control over decisions that are made that directly affect them. They have felt unheard by those in power, or at times patronised by those in power. And I think it's that lack of sense of control and that resentment to the powerful elites that also fueled people's willingness to vote for leave. But we can't really divorce this from our own political context here. We live in a political impasse. We're in limbo land, and the failure of our politicians to find a solution is frankly a ridiculous state of affairs. Here we are. Normally, you can put up with a certain amount of sectarianism before an election, but here we are months after an election. People are elected, and yet they still cannot do the business that they've been elected to do, namely act in the common good of the people of Northern Ireland. The increasingly acrimonious and bellicose language, if not used by, but certainly condoned by politicians, has made compromise increasingly difficult. In my view, where do we go? Well, in my view, there really is only one viable proposal on the table for Northern Ireland. That is, as a political entity which remains part of the United Kingdom, governed by a power-sharing executive, in my view, based on a voluntary cross-community coalition, that has a functioning North-South Ministerial Council, a British-Irish Council, a British-Irish Intergovernmental Conference, an active civic forum, and citizens entitled, as I think they are anyway, to hold dual citizenship, a common travel area, and cultural rights respected and protected, if not entirely by legislation, certainly by the agreement that political parties signed up to in the Good Friday Agreement and the St Andrews Agreements. Having said that, having sort of set out my stall, let me also add that discussions around special designated status, Northern Ireland remaining in the customs union, a customs border in the mid-Irish Sea, are, to coin a phrase, dead in the water. At least in those terms used to describe them. Whether, I think it was Katie in one of her talks said, whether you can present the concept using different words may become acceptable, and politicians are masters at rephrasing difficult issues. But certainly as they stand, those issues, I think, will not see the light of day in the current political situation that we live in, because most unionists believe in the slippery slope. They believe that the talk of rights and equality is a Sinn Féin Trojan horse that will be devastating to the welfare and well-being of Northern Ireland. They believe that there is a cultural war taking place. They believe that their culture is being undermined and eroded, and that Britishness and British culture is unwelcome in Northern Ireland. Now, that you may disagree with that. Many people do. But I can tell you that that is an absolute, genuine perception of many from the unionist community. Unionists don't see any future for themselves in a united Ireland as currently portrayed by Sinn Féin. What's more, they have no desire to be part of a united Ireland, and see being forced into a united Ireland by a narrow majority voting in favour of reunification as many times worse than Brexit. John made reference to the report from the Joint Committee on the Implementation of the Good Friday Agreement, the report entitled Uniting Ireland and Its People in Peace and Prosperity, a title guaranteed to win over unionists. And in it said, in the introduction it said, Senator Daly engaged comprehensively with a wide range of politicians, academics and other stakeholders for this report. Well, I have yet to meet a unionist that he engaged even superficially with in the preparation of this report. So to many unionists that says it all. It's all about Irish unity, but we don't have a place in it or a contribution to make. We essentially have a crisis of trust. I look back almost sentimentally to the Chuckle brothers and to the relationship between Mark McGuinness and Ian Paisley. And we can be cynical and dismissive, but the fact of the matter is that politics worked at that time. And there was a measure of trust and partnership and cooperation. I personally, I'll tell you a story. I asked a friend of mine who has done a lot of, he's not a politician, he's worked with politicians. I said to him, at the time when, just before that second iteration of the power sharing executive got up and running, I said, well, it'll be interesting to see how the doctor and Martin McGuinness get on. And he said very perceptively, he said, oh, they're getting on a lot better than Trimble and Mallon did. Said that both of them have got far better social skills and people skills than either Seamus Mallon or David Trimble. And he was absolutely right. And it shows the importance of those personalities and how personalities relate in politics to get business done. But the bottom line is that we have no trust in our political system at present. And let me then read to you, and I think this shows how far we have fallen. This was the declaration of support for the Good Friday Agreement, for the agreement as it was called. And within the declaration of support, the party said, "We firmly dedicate ourselves to the achievement of reconciliation, tolerance and mutual trust, and to the protection and vindication of the human rights of all. We are committed to partnership, equality, mutual respect as the basis of relationships within Northern Ireland, between North and South, and between the islands." Now that's what we committed ourselves to, and yet that is a distant memory in terms of the current politics and the situation that we live in. There is no sense of partnership, equality and mutual respect between Republicans and Unionists or Loyalists. It has disappeared. And yet that, to me, was absolutely fundamental to the successful implementation of the Good Friday Agreement. So that is the problem that we face. Let me make a couple more just closing comments then. let me say first of all that demographic changes make it highly likely that probably in my children's lifetime, perhaps not in mine, there will be a majority in Northern Ireland who are of a nationalist, Republican, Catholic background. I think the prospect of a border poll, which Sinn Féin have again put centre stage, which they have exploited, which they have promoted, I think, frankly, it is a disaster. And I think the experiences of Brexit, of the Scottish referendum, the Catalonian referendum, indicate that bringing about such monumental changes on the basis of a referendum where 50% plus one means these changes happen is a recipe for disaster. I think it undermines the stability of democracies. And I think if we're going to consider something of such fundamental consequences, then there needs to be a more sophisticated, prolonged and graduated process to address it. Let me just give you an example from medicine. There's a terrible disease called Huntington's chorea. It's an inherited disease, but it only manifests itself in midlife or late middle age. Middle age. But it involves becoming demented, dementia, poor physical coordination, and it's a prolonged, gradual decline. The problem about it is that if you have it, your children have a 50% chance of inheriting it. Now, in medicine, when it comes to diagnosing this, and when it comes to then investigating the children of patients with Huntington's chorea, it's not done in the course of a week or even 2 weeks. It is a gradual process with counselling, giving people time to process the information, doing the tests, waiting after the test is done, giving people time to process the implications of what is a life-changing diagnosis. I think major constitutional changes ought to be treated in the same way, with the same respect. That it's not just something that a referendum over the course of 3 or 6 months, ending up in a vote where 50% plus one is the winning side. I think that is a recipe for disaster. I think within the agreement, while not perfect, offers much to all parties. It is framed in a way which allows for change over time, and if implemented in the spirit in which it was signed, allows us to consider more flexible and customised solutions to the problems presented by Brexit. And that will inevitably arise in a country where there are competing identities. And let me finish by saying that perhaps we should look and learn from Canada, which this year celebrates the 150th anniversary of the Confederation. And Canada described itself as a country of 3 nations: the British nation, the French nation, and the Aboriginal nation. And they've managed to do it, to create a country that Canadians are comfortable in, feel a part of, and are proud of. Peter Russell described it as a country based on incomplete conquests. And I think that says something about Northern Ireland. We must accept that compromise and accommodation are in the best interests, not just of Northern Ireland, but of Ireland and of the United Kingdom. And that the Good Friday Agreement offers us a framework within which compromise and accommodation could be found if we sought it.